Keanu Reeves buys a sandwich at his own diner, stops cold when he hears two cashiers. A Hollywood legend walks into a small diner wearing faded jeans and 3 days of stubble. Nobody recognizes him. Nobody even glances his way. But what he witnesses over the next 72 hours will shatter everything he thought he knew about his own business. An elderly dishwasher with trembling hands secretly pays for struggling customers from his own pocket. Two young employees plot to destroy him with lies and manufactured evidence. And when the truth finally explodes into the open, not a single person in that restaurant will ever forget what happens next. This is not a movie. This is real life. Keanu Reeves adjusted the worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes as he pushed open the door to Thompson's diner. The familiar bell chimed above his head, but not a single employee glanced his way. Perfect. His disguise of faded jeans, an old flannel shirt, and 3 days' worth of stubble was working exactly as intended. For 12 years, he had owned this place, building it from a struggling, greasy spoon into a beloved local institution with 4 locations across Los Angeles. The diner bore the name of his late best friend, Charlie Thompson, whose dream had been to create a place where everyone felt like family. After Charlie passed, Keanu quietly purchased the struggling restaurant and transformed it into something extraordinary. Yet, he rarely visited anymore. Too busy with film projects, motorcycle business ventures, and charity commitments. Something had been nagging at him lately, though. Customer reviews remained stellar, but employee turnover had increased dramatically. Profits at this flagship location had mysteriously dipped despite steady customer traffic. "Table for one?" asked the waitress without looking up from her notepad. "Counter's fine," Keanu replied, deliberately roughening his voice. He settled onto a stool at the far end of the counter, where he could observe the entire operation. The lunch rush was in full swing. Waitresses hurried between tables. Line cooks shouted orders. The cash register chimed steadily. Everything looked normal on the surface, yet something felt terribly wrong. That was when he first noticed Walt. The elderly dishwasher moved with a careful deliberation that contrasted sharply with the frantic pace around him. While others rushed past in chaos, Walt methodically stacked plates, his gnarled hands working with surprising precision. He was rail-thin with a shock of white hair, probably in his mid-70s, yet his eyes remained alert and observant beneath bushy eyebrows. "What can I get you?" A young cashier finally acknowledged Keanu's presence. Her name tag read Ashley. "Turkey Club and coffee," Keanu said, sliding a 20 across the counter. As Ashley rang up his order, he nodded toward Walt. "He been here long." Ashley rolled her eyes dramatically. "Forever. Should have retired years ago if you asked me." Keanu watched Walt over the rim of his coffee cup for the next hour. The old man never stopped moving, never complained. Even when a busboy carelessly dumped a tray of dishes into his station, splashing dirty water onto his already soaked apron, Walt simply continued working without a word of protest. But Keanu noticed something remarkable. Customers greeted Walt by name whenever they passed the dish window. And Walt, always, had a kind word or gentle smile in return. There was something almost sacred about the way this elderly man carried himself through each mundane task. Just before the end of lunch service, Keanu witnessed something that made his heart stop. A young woman with 2 small children finished her meal and approached the register. As she opened her wallet, her face fell instantly. She whispered something to Ashley, who immediately frowned and called over another cashier. Brandon, according to his name tag. They spoke in hushed, annoyed tones while the young mother grew increasingly embarrassed. Her children, sensing her distress, began to fidget nervously. Walt, who had been wiping down the dish station, looked over at the commotion. Without a single moment of hesitation, he dried his hands and shuffled toward the register. Keanu could not hear what was said, but he watched as Walt discreetly slipped some bills from his own pocket to Ashley. The mother's relief was visible across her entire face as she gathered her children and left, thanking Walt profusely with tears in her eyes. That's the third time this week. Brandon muttered to Ashley, loud enough for Keanu to hear clearly. Old fool's going to go broke saving strays. Ashley snickered cruelly. A's if he isn't broke already. Bet he sleeps in that junker car of his. Keanu's hands tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. The manager on duty, a harried-looking woman named Karen, whom Keanu vaguely remembered hiring 2 years ago, walked past without noticing the exchange. She seemed completely oblivious to the cruelty unfolding right beneath her nose. Over the next several hours, Keanu observed everything. Walt stayed well past what should have been the end of his shift, meticulously cleaning areas others had neglected entirely. Twice more, Keanu witnessed him quietly cover for customers who came up short. Once for a teenager whose card was declined, and again for an elderly veteran who seemed confused about the prices on the menu. Why does he do that? Keanu asked a regular customer seated next to him, nodding toward Walt. The man George had been coming to the diner for almost a decade. Walt, he's good people, the best kind. Lost his wife Dorothy about 5 years back. Cancer. Wiped out their entire savings, everything they had worked their whole lives for. George shook his head slowly, pain evident in his weathered features. He won't take charity, though. Too proud. So he works, even though his arthritis is getting worse every single day. George paused, his voice cracking slightly. Breaks my heart when I hear some of these kids talk about him. They don't make men like Walt anymore. As the afternoon stretched on, Keanu noticed Walt wincing whenever he thought nobody was watching. The old man rubbed his lower back constantly when he had to bend over the industrial sink, yet he never complained, never slowed down, never asked for help. When a young waitress dropped a full tray of dishes with a tremendous crash, it was Walt who quickly appeared with a mop, waving away her tearful apologies. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," Walt told her kindly, his voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Accidents happen to everyone." Brandon, passing by with deliberate slowness, muttered under his breath just loud enough to be heard. "Yeah, especially around useless old men who should be rotting in a nursing home." The waitress looked deeply uncomfortable, but said nothing as Brandon walked away laughing with cruel satisfaction. At 5 o'clock, the dinner shift employees began arriving. Walt should have clocked out hours ago, but Keanu watched him start cleaning the grease traps instead. It was a filthy, disgusting job normally assigned to the night crew. "Walt, go home," Karen called out as she prepared to end her own shift. "Night crew can handle that mess." "Just finishing up," Walt replied cheerfully. Jake called in sick again. "Don't mind staying a bit longer." Karen sighed heavily but did not argue further. Keanu had the distinct impression this was a regular occurrence. Walt picking up slack that others refused to carry. As Keanu nursed his third cup of coffee, he observed Brandon and Ashley huddled at the end of the counter, whispering intensely and occasionally glancing toward Walt. Their body language set off every alarm bell in Keanu's mind. The furtive looks, the knowing smirks, the calculated way they kept checking to ensure nobody was listening to their conversation. Suddenly, Ashley approached the register, frowned dramatically, and called Brandon over with exaggerated concern. They made an elaborate show of counting the drawer, looking increasingly troubled with each passing moment. Then Brandon loudly announced to the entire restaurant, "We're short again!" "That's the third time this week." Karen, who was gathering her belongings to leave, looked up sharply with concern. "How much?" $42, Ashley declared, her voice carrying deliberately to draw attention from nearby tables. "Same as last Tuesday and Thursday. 35 before that." Keanu watched Walt straighten up from his work at the dish station. A flicker of concern crossed the old man's weathered face. With growing unease, Keanu realized he was witnessing the beginning of something deeply ugly. The elderly man who had spent the entire day silently helping others now stood alone at his station, completely unaware that he was being watched, not just by Keanu, but by the plotting eyes of two employees who had decided Walt was expendable. Keanu had come to his diner looking for business insights. Instead, he had discovered something far more valuable and far more disturbing. As he studied Walt's dignified profile against the harsh kitchen lights, Keanu made a silent promise to himself. He would learn the full truth about what was happening in this restaurant, no matter how painful that truth might ultimately be. Keanu returned to Thompson's diner the following day, arriving during the mid-afternoon lull when fewer customers would notice his presence. He chose a booth near the counter where he could observe without drawing unwanted attention, maintaining his disguise of worn clothes and the same low, pulled cap. Walt was already working, moving slightly slower than yesterday. Keanu noticed him discreetly rubbing his wrist whenever he thought nobody was watching. The pain was clearly getting worse. Brandon and Ashley were also on shift, their heads bent together at the register whenever business slowed down. Their whispered conversations carried a sinister quality that made Keanu's stomach turn. He ordered coffee and pie, then used a newspaper as cover while listening carefully to their conversation. The diner had emptied, except for a few regulars and a businessman absorbed in his laptop. Brandon leaned against the counter, near Ashley's register, speaking in a low voice that still carried to Keanu's booth with perfect clarity. "So anyway, I checked the employee records, and old man Walt has been here for 7 years, Brandon said, smirking with contempt. Can you believe that? 7 years washing dishes. Absolutely pathetic. Ashley snorted with derision. What's pathetic is how he keeps covering for these deadbeats who can't pay their bills, like that single mom yesterday. Come on! Yeah, playing the hero with what? His social security pennies. Brandon laughed mockingly. Guy probably lives off cat food to save money. Keanu's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup as he fought desperately to maintain his composure. He had built this business with Charlie's vision of creating a place that felt like home for both customers and employees alike. Hearing such vicious cruelty from his own staff made his stomach turn with disgust and shame. I bet he actually lives in his car, Ashley said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Have you seen that rusty book he drives? Probably sleeps curled up in the back seat like a homeless person. Brandon snickered with cruel amusement. My money's on a cardboard box behind the Walmart. Either way, he's becoming a serious problem. Karen is starting to notice the register discrepancies. Their voices dropped even lower, and Keanu strained forward to hear every word. So here's what I'm thinking, Brandon said, checking carefully to ensure nobody was listening. We know Walt has been slipping money into the register whenever customers come up short. But Karen doesn't know that. All she sees is that the numbers don't add up at the end of each shift. Ashley's eyes lit up with malicious understanding. So if we just help those numbers not add up a little more. Exactly. Brandon nodded with satisfaction. And then we make sure Karen catches Walt near the register at the wrong time. She'll think he's been stealing all along. She'll fire him on the spot. Ashley finished, barely containing her excitement at the prospect. And nobody will believe a 70-year-old dishwasher over 2 young employees with clean records. Keanu felt a cold weight settle deep in his chest. They were not just mocking an elderly man. They were actively plotting to destroy him with manufactured lies. But why? Keanu wanted to shout across the restaurant. Instead, he turned a page of his newspaper and listened for their twisted justification. Because, Brandon explained with casual cruelty, I've got a cousin named Derek who needs a job. Young guy, twice as fast as Grandpa shuffling around over there. If Walt gets fired for theft, I can bring Derek in immediately. We split the referral bonus, and everybody wins. Plus, Ashley added with obvious disgust, I'm completely sick of watching Walt shuffle around like some charity case. It's depressing to look at every day, and the way customers fawn all over him constantly. "Oh, Walt, you're so kind!" "Oh, Walt, you're such a saint!" Makes me want to vomit. Tomorrow, Brandon decided with cold finality. Karen is doing full inventory, so she'll be extra focused on the numbers. We'll make sure they don't add up, and we'll make sure Walt is the only possible explanation. The pair sealed their despicable plan with a casual fist bump before separating as a family entered the diner. Keanu sat frozen in his booth, coffee growing cold before him. Fury and profound disappointment warred in his chest like a violent storm. For the rest of the afternoon, Keanu observed Walt with entirely new eyes. The old man moved with quiet purpose despite his obvious physical pain, taking extra care with each task assigned to him. When a waitress dropped several plates with a crash, Walt quickly helped clean up the mess while shielding her from Karen's irritation. When the coffee machine backed up and flooded the counter, Walt stayed late to fix it properly without complaint. And true to what Keanu had witnessed yesterday, when a teenager's card was declined at the register, Walt quietly slipped Ashley some cash from his own pocket when he thought nobody was watching. The boy left with his meal, completely unaware that a stranger had just performed an act of invisible kindness on his behalf. "Why do you let that kid slide?" Keanu overheard Brandon ask Walt afterward, his voice dripping with contempt. Walt shrugged, his voice soft but absolutely firm. His mother lost her job last month. Boy's too proud to accept charity from anyone. But I know he's hungry. Sometimes a simple meal makes all the difference in the world. Brandon rolled his eyes dramatically the moment Walt turned away, making an exaggerated mocking gesture toward Ashley, who stifled a cruel laugh. As closing time approached, Keanu paid his bill and left the diner, but he did not go far. Parked across the street in his modest sedan, he waited in growing anticipation. When Walt finally emerged, almost an hour after his shift should have ended, Keanu followed at a discreet distance. Walt's ancient book coughed reluctantly to life, and he drove slowly through town, past the residential neighborhoods with their comfortable homes and manicured lawns, toward the outskirts where the diner was located. But instead of continuing on the main road, Walt turned onto a dirt access road behind the commercial properties. Keanu followed carefully, keeping his headlights extinguished as he navigated the rutted path through the darkness. The buick finally stopped behind a cluster of overgrown trees that partially obscured the back lot of Thompson's diner itself. There, nearly invisible from the main road, sat a small, dilapidated trailer that had clearly seen better days several decades ago. The structure leaned slightly to one side. Rust covered every visible surface. A blue tarp had been stretched over one corner of the roof to cover what was obviously a serious leak. Walt parked his car and slowly made his way up 3 wooden steps that looked ready to collapse under any weight at all. The door stuck badly, requiring his frail shoulder to push it open with considerable effort. A single light bulb flickered to life inside, illuminating a space so impossibly small that Keanu could barely fathom how any human being actually lived there. Sitting in the darkness of his car, Keanu felt overwhelming shame wash over him in waves. How had he never known about this? How had he failed so completely to ensure his own employees could afford decent housing? This man had been working in his restaurant for 7 years, and Keanu had no idea Walt was living in conditions that would break most people's spirits entirely. The next morning, before returning to the diner, Keanu approached some regular customers while maintaining his disguise carefully. "That dishwasher, Walt." He asked an elderly couple enjoying their breakfast. "What's his story?" "Lost his Dorothy 5 years ago to cancer." The woman replied softly, her eyes filling with tears at the memory. They had to sell absolutely everything to pay the medical bills. Their house, their car, their retirement savings, everything they had built together over 2 years of marriage. She paused to dab at her eyes with a napkin. He still sends money to the hospital every single month to pay off what remains of the debt. Refuses to declare bankruptcy. Says a debt is a debt, and an honest man pays what he owes. Does he have any family? Keanu asked quietly. A daughter named Emily out in Seattle. She wants desperately for him to move in with her and her husband. But Walt refuses absolutely. Says he won't be a burden on anyone. Too proud for his own good, if you ask me. Her husband leaned forward with additional information. That trailer park where he lives, it's being sold to developers next month. All residents have 60 days to find new housing. Rental prices around here have gone through the roof. Walt hasn't told anyone at work yet. I think he's too ashamed. Where will he go? Keanu asked, dreading the answer. The old man shrugged helplessly. Nobody knows. His daughter calls more often now, begging him to come to Seattle. He still refuses every time. Why? Keanu pressed, genuinely puzzled. The people at the diner. The woman explained with a sad smile. They're his family now. The only family he has here. And those customers he helps quietly. He says it gives him purpose. Being able to help others even when he has so little himself. It's the only thing that keeps him going some days. As Keanu drove toward the diner, he understood with crystal clarity. He could not stand by while Brandon and Ashley destroyed a good man for their petty, selfish gain. By morning, he would have a complete plan to reveal the truth and ensure justice was served at Thompson's diner. Sleep eluded Keanu completely that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Walt's stooped figure climbing those rickety trailer steps to a home barely bigger than Keanu's own walk-in closet. The contrast between his life of Hollywood comfort and Walt's daily struggle for basic dignity was stark, painful, and absolutely impossible to ignore any longer. By dawn, Keanu had made numerous phone calls, setting several intricate plans into motion simultaneously. He arrived at Thompson's diner an hour before opening, watching from his parked car as employees filtered in one by one. Walt was among the very first to arrive, his ancient book wheezing into the back lot like a dying animal. Despite what must have been another poor night's sleep in that cramped, leaking trailer, the old man moved with quiet purpose. He paused only once to rub his lower back before disappearing inside to begin another long day of invisible labor. Instead of following immediately, Keanu drove to a nearby coffee shop where he had arranged to meet George, the regular customer who had spoken so kindly about Walt the day before. "Thanks for meeting me so early," Keanu said, maintaining his disguise carefully. George stirred his coffee slowly, clearly troubled by the conversation's serious tone. "You seem really interested in Walt. Mind if I ask why?" "I think he's in danger," Keanu said simply, "and I need to understand his full story to help him properly." George studied Keanu's face for a long moment, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. "I've known Walt for almost 6 years now. Started coming to the diner right after his wife Dorothy passed away. Dot was his whole world, you understand. High school sweethearts, married 52 years. Never spent a single night apart until the cancer came." "What happened exactly?" Keanu asked quietly. "The cancer was aggressive. Came out of nowhere and spread fast. Dorothy needed experimental treatments that their insurance absolutely refused to cover. Walt didn't think twice about what to do. Sold their house over on Maple Street. Cashed in his entire retirement fund. Even sold their car, the one they had taken on road trips across America for decades." George's voice grew rough with emotion as he continued. "I moved Dorothy into the best care facility in the county. Got her every treatment available, no matter the cost. Held her hand through every single chemotherapy session. Slept in a chair beside her bed for 8 straight months." "Did it help?" Keanu asked, though he already knew the answer. "Gave them 8 more months together," George said, wiping his eyes with the back of his weathered hand. "Walt says those were the most precious months of his entire life. Even though they were also the hardest thing he ever endured. He got to say goodbye properly. Got to tell her everything he wanted to say. That meant everything to him. And after Dorothy passed, the bills kept coming. George replied bitterly. Hospital bills, specialist bills, pharmacy bills, equipment rental bills. They just kept arriving in the mail like a never-ending nightmare. Walt refused to declare bankruptcy, said Dorothy deserved better than having her memory attached to unpaid debts. Said an honest man pays what he owes, no matter how long it takes. So he took the dishwashing job, Keanu said softly. George nodded with profound sadness. Only place that would hire a 70-year-old man with severe arthritis and zero experience in the food service industry. Thompson's Diner gave him a chance when nobody else would. He works harder than men half his age, and he never complains about anything. Not once in 6 years? And the trailer? Keanu asked. Best he could afford while still making his monthly payments to the hospital and sending a little something to his daughter Emily in Seattle. George shook his head slowly. She doesn't know how bad things really are. Walt makes absolutely sure of that. Sends her pictures taken inside the diner. Tells her business is good and he's doing fine. She thinks he's practically a manager there. Living in a nice apartment, enjoying his golden years. Each new detail landed like a physical blow to Keanu's conscience. He had built his business on the principle that Thompson's Diner would be different. A place where both customers and staff were treated like family. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that sacred mission completely. There's something else you should know, George continued reluctantly. That trailer park where Walt lives, it's being demolished for a new shopping center. Residents have 60 days to relocate. Walt hasn't told anyone at work because he has absolutely nowhere else to go. Rental prices in this town have tripled over the past few years. On a dishwasher's salary, he can't afford even the cheapest studio apartment. What about his daughter? Keanu asked. Emily's been calling every day now, begging him to move to Seattle. She and her husband have plenty of room. They want him there desperately, but he refuses. Every single time. George sighed heavily. Says he won't be a burden on his own child. Says the people at the diner need him. Says helping others is the only thing that gives his life meaning anymore. Keanu thanked George sincerely and headed back toward the diner, his mind racing with plans. He arrived just as the morning rush reached its peak. Slipping into his usual booth, his attention fixed on the interactions playing out before him with new understanding. Walt worked steadily at the dish station, occasionally emerging to bus tables when the rush became overwhelming. Despite what must have been constant, grinding pain in his joints, his only concession to age was a slightly slower pace than the younger staff members around him. Brandon and Ashley, meanwhile, were putting their despicable plan into motion with practiced efficiency. Keanu watched with growing fury as Brandon deliberately miscounted change for several customers, pocketing small amounts each time with a casual expertise that suggested long practice. Ashley, accidentally, voided legitimate transactions after customers departed, creating deliberate discrepancies in the register totals. Each time they succeeded, they exchanged knowing looks and occasionally glanced toward Walt with smirks that made Keanu's blood boil with righteous anger. Around 11 o'clock, a young mother entered the diner holding the hand of a small girl about 5 years old. They were dressed simply but neatly, with the subtle signs of financial hardship visible to anyone paying close attention. Slightly worn shoes, a coat with a carefully mended sleeve, hair done at home rather than at a salon. This was Samantha Williams, a struggling single mother whom Keanu had contacted through a local community outreach program the previous evening. She was not acting a part. She really was raising her daughter Grace alone while working 2 exhausting jobs. But she had agreed to help Keanu today, in exchange for a generous donation to her daughter's education fund. Samantha and Grace took seats at a booth near the counter. Ashley approached to take their order, her customer service smile firmly fixed in place like a plastic mask. Just a grilled cheese for my daughter, and a cup of soup for me. Please, Samantha said quietly. When Samantha went to pay 20 minutes later, she opened her wallet and her face fell with genuine distress. I'm so sorry, she said to Ashley, her voice trembling slightly. I thought I had enough cash. My card was declined yesterday. Some bank issue they're still fixing. I'm $15 short. Ashley's smile transformed instantly into a cold sneer. Wu can't just give away food. Ma'am, maybe you should count your money before ordering next time. Samantha's eyes welled with tears of humiliation as her daughter Grace looked up in confusion, sensing something was terribly wrong, but too young to understand exactly what. Could I maybe wash dishes to make up the difference? Samantha offered desperately. I really don't have anywhere else to go. My daughter needs to eat. We have staff for that, Ashley replied curtly, making no effort to hide her contempt. From his position at the dish window, Walt had been watching the entire exchange unfold. Without a single moment of hesitation, he dried his wrinkled hands on his apron and shuffled toward the register with quiet determination. I've got it, Ashley, Walt said softly, reaching for his worn wallet. That's really not necessary, Samantha protested, playing her part with genuine emotion. Walt smiled kindly, his weathered face radiating pure compassion. We all need help sometimes, young lady. You can pay it forward someday when things get better. That's how the world is supposed to work. As Walt handed over the crumpled bills to cover Samantha's shortfall, Keanu observed Brandon watching the entire scene from the second register. A satisfied smirk spread across his face like a disease. The trap was being set exactly as Keanu had anticipated. Samantha thanked Walt profusely, then departed with grace, her dignity intact thanks to the kindness of a stranger. Less than 10 minutes later, Brandon approached Karen, who was reviewing receipts at the counter with her usual harried expression. Boss, Brandon said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. You might want to check Register 1 again. I think we're short another $20 from the last count. Karen's expression darkened with concern. That's impossible. I just balanced it an hour ago myself. Ashley joined them immediately, her face arranged into a perfect mask of worried concern. Actually, I noticed something really weird earlier. When that woman couldn't pay her full bill, Walt came over right afterward, and I saw him hanging around the register while I was helping another customer. Are you suggesting Walt is stealing? Karen asked, echoing yesterday's conversation, but with considerably more worry in her voice now. Brandon shrugged with calculated fake sympathy. I'm just saying, Karen, maybe check the cameras. He paused dramatically. Oh wait, the cameras have been broken for months now. The owner never approved the budget for new ones. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? This is very serious, Karen said, clearly distressed by the implications. If someone on staff is actually stealing, I need to know right now. The owner has been asking pointed questions about why the numbers haven't been adding up lately. Maybe do a surprise cash count, Ashley suggested helpfully, right now, before anyone has a chance to adjust anything. Karen nodded grimly and began counting the drawer with Brandon and Ashley hovering nearby like vultures circling wounded prey. Keanu could observe from their expressions the exact moment Karen discovered the shortage they had deliberately engineered. $37 missing, Karen announced, her face pale with shock. That's over $100 this week alone. I have absolutely no choice now. I have to take immediate action. Keanu watched as Karen straightened her shoulders with visible reluctance and marched toward the dish room, where Walt was working, completely unaware of the storm about to break over his head. Brandon and Ashley followed close behind, barely concealing their triumphant expressions. Walt, Karen called out, her voice strained with genuine discomfort. Can I speak with you for a moment? The elderly man looked up from his work, confusion crossing his weathered face as he noticed the serious expressions on all three staff members standing before him. Of course, Karen. Is something wrong? I need to ask you directly, Karen said, her voice heavy with reluctance. The register has been coming up short all week. Today alone, we're missing nearly $40. And it happened right after you were seen near the cash drawer. The Walt's face registered shock, followed immediately by deep, profound hurt. The kind of hurt that comes from unexpected betrayal. You think I'm stealing? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. We've seen you at the register multiple times when you have absolutely no reason to be there. Brandon added, his voice dripping with false regret. And the money always goes missing right afterward. Every single time. I was helping customers who couldn't pay their full bills. Walt explained, looking utterly bewildered by the accusation. I was putting money into the register, not taking it out. I would never steal from anyone. Ashley scoffed loudly. On a dishwasher's salary. How exactly would you manage that? How convenient that nobody can verify your story. Walt's weathered hands trembled slightly as the full implications became devastatingly clear. I would never steal. Not from anyone, and certainly not from this diner. This place has been my lifeline these past 7 years, the only thing keeping me going. Karen looked genuinely torn, her face a battleground of conflicting emotions. Walt, I've always trusted you completely, but the numbers don't lie, and with multiple witnesses saying they've seen you accessing the register inappropriately. Multiple witnesses. Walt looked around in obvious confusion, as if searching for allies who had suddenly vanished. Who exactly? Ashley and Brandon both reported seeing you. Karen explained reluctantly. On multiple occasions this week. Understanding dawned slowly on Walt's lined face, followed by a profound sadness that made Keanu's chest physically ache. The old man did not defend himself further, did not accuse his co-workers of lying, did not protest his innocence with desperate words. He simply stood there, dignity somehow intact despite the humiliation being heaped upon his frail shoulders. I see, Walt said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I suppose you'll be wanting my resignation then. I'm afraid I have to let you go immediately, Karen said, genuine regret thick in her voice. Company policy for theft allegations is absolutely clear. I have no choice in the matter. A hush had fallen over the entire diner like a heavy blanket. Customers and staff alike had stopped everything to watch the confrontation unfold. Many wore expressions of disbelief that Walt, of all people, could possibly be accused of such a crime. Brandon stepped forward with poorly disguised eagerness. I'll escort him to get his personal things from the back. That won't be necessary, came a new voice from across the restaurant. Keanu stood up from his booth, but he no longer slouched or affected a rougher manner of speaking. He straightened to his full height, removed the worn baseball cap, and walked toward the group with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention in every room he entered. Karen's eyes widened in sudden recognition, her face draining of color. Mr. Reeves, I had absolutely no idea you were here. If I'd known you were coming for an inspection. Clearly, Keanu interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. There seems to be a situation here that requires the owner's immediate attention. The silence in Thompson's diner was now absolutely complete. Silverware froze in mid-air. Conversations halted in mid-sentence. Even the kitchen's usual clamor fell completely quiet. Every single eye in the restaurant followed the famous actor as he approached the group surrounding Walt. Mr. Reeves. Karen managed weakly, her complexion now ashen. Sir, we were just following standard protocol for theft incidents. As I was telling Walt. Enough. Keanu's quiet tone was somehow more commanding than any shout could ever be. Brandon's mouth snapped shut instantly, his confident smirk evaporating like morning dew. Walt stood bewildered at his dishwashing station, water still dripping from his reddened hands. His eyes moved between Keanu and the others as he tried desperately to process this completely unexpected development. Keanu turned to address the entire diner, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed space. For those who don't recognize me, I'm Keanu Reeves. I founded this restaurant chain 12 years ago with a simple vision. Treat every customer like family. Treat every employee with genuine respect and dignity. Somewhere along the way, that vision was badly compromised. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small electronic device. Karen mentioned broken security cameras earlier. Interesting observation, since I personally authorized installation of new ones 2 days ago. Hidden cameras, with full audio capability. Karen's eyes widened in shock, but I never received any notification about new equipment. I'm fully aware of that. Keanu interrupted smoothly. There are several communication breakdowns within this organization that we'll address very soon. But for now, I'd like everyone present to see exactly what has been happening inside my restaurant. With practiced ease, Keanu connected the device to the large television mounted in the corner. The screen flickered to life, displaying crystal clear footage from the previous day. There was Brandon, clearly visible, pocketing small bills from the register while telling a customer their total was significantly higher than it should have been. His hands moved with the casual expertise of someone who had done this many times before. Next came Ashley, deliberately voiding legitimate transactions after customers departed, creating the discrepancies she would later blame on an innocent man. Then both of them, huddled together at the counter's end, plotting in what they believed were safe whispers. But the enhanced audio picked up every single word with perfect, damning clarity. If we frame Walt for stealing, Karen will have to fire him immediately. Then I can bring in my cousin Derek to take his place. We split the referral bonus, and no more pathetic old man bringing everyone down with his charity act. Gasps rippled through the diner like waves spreading across still water. Several regular customers rose to their feet, their faces contorted with righteous anger. An elderly woman actually had to sit back down, overcome with emotion. There's considerably more, Keanu said grimly, advancing the footage. The screen now displayed Walt in an entirely different light. It showed him quietly slipping his own money into the register after helping customers who could not afford to pay their full bills. It showed him staying hours after his shift should have ended, meticulously cleaning areas that others had deliberately neglected. It showed him defending younger staff members from angry customers, absorbing complaints and blame for mistakes he had not made. Keanu paused the footage on a frame showing Brandon and Ashley that very morning, deliberately creating the cash shortage they had just accused Walt of stealing. This morning's evidence was completely manufactured. Keanu announced, his voice tight with carefully controlled fury. The only theft occurring in this diner has been perpetrated by the very people making false accusations against an innocent man. Brandon's face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure about to melt. Ashley had begun crying loudly, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivers. Mr. Reeves. Brandon stammered desperately. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We can explain everything if you'll just give us a chance to... A misunderstanding. Keanu repeated, his voice dangerously soft now. Is that what you call deliberately framing a dedicated employee? Stealing from the register you were trusted to manage. Mocking a man who has endured more hardship in 1 year than you've experienced in your entire privileged life. He took a step closer to Brandon, and the younger man actually flinched backward. Do you know anything about Walt's life? Do you know that he sold everything he owned to pay for his dying wife's cancer treatment? Do you know he still sends money every month to the hospital to pay off her medical bills, 5 years after she passed? Do you know he lives in a trailer so small and so decrepit that you wouldn't keep your dog there? Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but no words emerged. Ashley began crying harder now. Please, Mr. Reeves, we didn't mean to. We were just what? Keanu finished for her. Just didn't think you'd get caught. That's the only thing either of you regret. Getting caught. He turned to address Karen directly, his voice softening slightly, but remaining firm. Did you know Walt lives in a dilapidated trailer right behind this very restaurant? Did you know he skips meals regularly so he can afford to help customers who come up short? Did you know he's been working through excruciating arthritis pain every single day because he refuses to be a burden on anyone? Karen shook her head, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I had absolutely no idea, sir. None at all, because the management structure I created failed him completely. Keanu continued. I failed him. I got so busy with other projects that I forgot what this business was supposed to be about. He turned to address the rest of his staff and the customers who had gathered to witness the unfolding drama. Walt Lawson embodies everything Thompson's Diner was meant to stand for: compassion for strangers, dignity in the face of hardship, service without expectation of reward. Instead of honoring those qualities, we allowed him to be humiliated by two individuals whose only concern was their own selfish gain. Brandon made a sudden desperate lunge toward the door, but two burly regular customers immediately moved to block his path. They crossed their arms and stared him down with expressions that promised severe consequences if he tried to push past them. You can't leave yet, Keanu said calmly. The police will want to speak with both of you about the theft clearly documented on video, multiple counts of employee theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false accusations against a coworker. Those are serious charges that carry serious consequences. Ashley collapsed onto a nearby stool, sobbing uncontrollably now. Please, we'll pay everything back. We'll apologize to Walt. Just please don't involve the police. You should have thought about consequences before you decided to destroy an innocent man's life for a few $100s and a referral bonus. Keanu replied without sympathy. On cue, two police officers entered the diner through the front door. Keanu had called them earlier that morning, showing them all the footage before the restaurant even opened for business. They had been waiting outside for his signal. Brandon Cooper and Ashley Simmons. The lead officer announced formally, "You're both under arrest for employee theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and filing false criminal accusations." As the officers read them their rights, Brandon's earlier arrogance completely collapsed. "This isn't fair," he shouted as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "It was just a stupid prank. We were going to give the money back eventually." "Tell it to the judge," the officer replied flatly. Ashley had to be physically helped to her feet, still sobbing hysterically. "My parents are going to kill me. My whole life is ruined. This wasn't supposed to happen this way." Neither was destroying an innocent man's reputation and livelihood. Keanu observed coldly. Actions have consequences. Perhaps you'll learn that lesson now, though I suspect it's one you should have learned much earlier in life. As the police officers escorted Brandon and Ashley toward the waiting patrol cars outside, their former coworkers watched in stunned silence. The power of the moment was not lost on anyone present. Character, not position, determines a person's true worth. And justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually finds its way to the truth. Through the window, customers watched as both former employees were placed in separate patrol cars. Brandon continued protesting loudly about his rights and threatening lawsuits that would never materialize. Ashley simply sat in the back seat, head bowed, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The charges they faced were substantial and real. Employee theft was a felony in California when the amount exceeded $400 over a 12-month period. The video evidence clearly showed they had stolen far more than that. Filing false accusations against a coworker added additional charges that could result in civil liability as well as criminal penalties. Their employment records would forever carry the stain of termination for cause. Their mugshots would appear in the local newspaper's police blotter section. Their families would learn exactly what kind of people they had become when they thought no one important was watching. This was not a slap on the wrist. This was the beginning of a very long and very difficult road toward whatever redemption they might eventually find, if they ever found it at all. Inside the diner, Keanu turned to Walt, who had been standing quietly throughout the entire confrontation. The elderly man's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his posture remained dignified despite everything he had just witnessed. "Walt," Keanu said, his voice softening considerably, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you for 7 years of service that went unrecognized and undervalued. I hope you'll allow me to begin making amends today." Walt looked up at Keanu with clear eyes that held not a trace of bitterness or resentment. "No apology needed, Mr. Reeves. You didn't know what was happening. You couldn't have known." "That's no excuse," Keanu replied firmly. "But I promise you this. From today forward, everyone will know. Everyone will know exactly what kind of man Walt Thompson truly is." The diner erupted in spontaneous applause. Customers stood from their booths and counter seats to show their support for the elderly dishwasher who had touched so many lives with small kindnesses over the years. Kindnesses they had never forgotten, even if Walt himself had. The morning after the dramatic confrontation, Thompson's diner opened as usual, but the atmosphere inside had transformed completely. Word had spread throughout the entire community about the famous owner's undercover investigation and the shocking exposure of 2 corrupt employees. Curious customers filled every booth and counter seat well before the usual rush. But they had not come merely for gossip or spectacle. They had come specifically to show support for Walt. Keanu arrived early, dressed in a simple button-down shirt rather than his usual casual attire. He wanted to make absolutely clear that things would be different from now on. That he was not just an absentee celebrity owner, but a present and engaged leader who cared deeply about every person in his organization. Walt arrived precisely on time, as he always did. He looked slightly uncomfortable with all the unusual attention being directed his way. Customers greeted him by name as he walked through the dining room, offering smiles and words of encouragement that made his weathered cheeks flush with embarrassed pleasure. "Walt," Keanu called out, gesturing toward the small office in back. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The entire diner fell instantly quiet as Walt made his way across the crowded room. Everyone present understood that this conversation would determine the future for a man they had all come to respect and admire. Inside the modest office, Keanu gestured for Walt to take the comfortable chair across from the desk. "I spent all of last night thinking about everything I've learned this week." Keanu began slowly. "About your situation, about your character, and most importantly, about how my own business has strayed so far from its founding principles." Walt sat with quiet dignity, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap. "Mr. Reeves, I want you to know I've always been grateful for this job. It came at a time when absolutely no one else would hire me. This place saved my life in more ways than I can properly express. That's exactly what I want to discuss with you," Keanu said, leaning forward earnestly. "You've been working as a dishwasher for 7 years, Walt. Often doing the work of 2 or even 3 people. Staying late without ever complaining. Showing more dedication and integrity than employees half your age who earn 3 times your salary." He slid a folder across the desk. "This isn't just a thank you, Walt. It's an acknowledgement of your true value to this company." Walt opened the folder with trembling hands. His eyes widened dramatically as he read the contents, then read them again to make sure he had understood correctly. "I don't understand," he whispered. "This can't be right." "It's very simple," Keanu explained with a warm smile. "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to floor manager of this location. The position comes with a substantial salary increase, full medical and dental benefits, and considerably more reasonable hours. The physical demands will be far less taxing on your health. Walt stared at the official paperwork in complete disbelief. But I don't have any management experience whatsoever. I've never supervised anyone in my entire life. You have something far more valuable than experience. Keanu replied firmly. You have integrity. You have compassion. You understand in your bones what Thompson's Diner was always meant to be about, better than anyone else in this organization, including me. The technical aspects of management can be learned quickly enough. Character cannot be taught. Before Walt could respond, Keanu pushed a second folder across the desk. There's something else I need to discuss with you. Walt looked up sharply, uncertainty flickering in his tired eyes. I took the liberty of calling your daughter Emily in Seattle last night, Keanu said gently. Walt's face went pale. You called Emily? But she doesn't know about my situation. She doesn't know about. She knows everything now. Keanu interrupted softly. About the trailer. About the medical bills. About all of it. She was heartbroken, Walt. Heartbroken that you've been struggling alone all these years while pretending everything was fine. Tears began welling in the old man's eyes, threatening to spill down his lined cheeks. I never wanted to burden her, Walt said, his voice cracking with emotion. She has her own life, her own family, her own problems to worry about. I couldn't add to her troubles. She said you would say exactly that. Keanu replied with a gentle smile. She also asked me to tell you something important. She said that love isn't a burden, Walt. Love is a privilege. The only burden you've placed on her is the burden of worrying about you from 2,000 miles away, unable to help. Keanu tapped the second folder meaningfully. Inside, you'll find the deed to a small house about 3 blocks from this diner. It's nothing fancy or extravagant, but it's comfortable, well-maintained, and close to your work. Most importantly, it's yours. No rent, no mortgage, no payments of any kind. Consider it 7 years' worth of overdue bonuses, finally delivered. Walt's hands trembled violently as he opened the folder and saw the official deed with his own name printed clearly on the document. Mr. Reeves, I cannot possibly accept this, he protested, his voice breaking completely. It's far too much. I haven't earned anything like this. It's not nearly enough, Keanu countered firmly. And yes, you have earned it. 100 times over. He reached across and placed his hand on the old man's shoulder. I also made arrangements with the hospital yesterday evening. Your wife Dorothy's remaining medical bills have been paid in full. The debt is completely cleared. You don't owe them another penny. At this, Walt's composure finally and completely shattered. Tears streamed freely down his deeply lined face as 7 years of constant struggle, quiet dignity, and relentless determination gave way to overwhelming gratitude. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he tried and failed to form words adequate to the moment. Why? He finally managed to whisper. Why would you do all of this for me? You barely know me. Keanu's own eyes misted over as he replied. Because you reminded me of something I had completely forgotten, Walt. You reminded me that a business isn't just about profit margins, expansion plans, and investor meetings. It's about people. Real people with real lives and real struggles. He paused to compose himself. Every single day for 7 years, you've been living the values I only talked about in speeches and mission statements. You showed me through your actions what compassion actually looks like in practice. So thank you, Walt. Thank you not just for your years of dedicated service, but for showing me how to be better as a business owner, as a member of this community, and as a human being. When they emerged from the office together, a few minutes later, the entire diner erupted in thunderous applause. Karen stood near the counter, her eyes red from crying, but her smile genuinely radiant with joy. The rest of the staff gathered around immediately, eager to congratulate Walt on his well-deserved promotion. Samantha Williams, the young mother from yesterday who had helped reveal the truth, stepped forward with her daughter Grace. "We started a collection for you, Mr. Walt," the little girl said shyly, holding out a jar filled with bills and coins. "Mommy says you're a hero." Keanu raised his hand gently. "Every penny of Walt's personal expenses has been covered completely, but I have a much better idea for those generous funds." He addressed the entire crowded restaurant. "Let's use this money to establish the Walt Thompson Community Fund. It will help others in our community who are facing medical bills, unexpected hardships, or difficult times they didn't anticipate. Walt has spent years helping strangers from his own pocket. Now it's time for the community to continue that mission in his honor on a much larger scale." The applause that followed was deafening. George, the regular customer who had shared Walt's story with Keanu, pushed through the crowd to embrace his old friend. "Dorothy would be so proud of you," George whispered in Walt's ear. "So incredibly proud." Walt could only nod, too overcome with emotion to speak. In the weeks and months that followed, Walt settled comfortably into both his new home and his new position at the diner. Though he no longer needed to work for financial survival, he stayed on willingly. Not from necessity, but from choice. Thompson's Diner had become more than just a workplace for him. It was his community, his purpose, his extended family. And every single day, when Walt walked through those familiar doors, he was greeted not as the struggling dishwasher who had once lived in a decrepit trailer, but as the man whose quiet compassion had transformed not just his own life, but an entire business and the community it served. Keanu kept every promise he had made. He remained actively involved in his restaurant business, visiting locations regularly and personally reviewing employee welfare programs. The changes he implemented at Thompson's Diner spread across all 4 locations, creating a company culture where kindness was valued as highly as profit, and where no employee would ever again be forced to choose between basic dignity and helping others in need. New management training programs emphasized recognizing the contributions of every team member, regardless of position or title. A comprehensive benefits package ensured that all employees had access to health care, retirement savings, and emergency assistance when life's unexpected challenges arose. The Walt Thompson Community Fund grew rapidly, eventually helping dozens of families facing medical crises, job losses, and other hardships they could never have anticipated. As for Brandon Cooper and Ashley Simmons, their stories served as a cautionary tale that spread far beyond the walls of Thompson's Diner. Brandon pleaded guilty to multiple counts of employee theft and filing false accusations. He received 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service at a local food bank, and was ordered to pay full restitution plus substantial fines. His criminal record followed him for years, making employment difficult to find and forcing him to rebuild his life from scratch. Ashley received similar consequences, plus mandatory counseling for the psychological manipulation she had displayed during the conspiracy. Her parents, prominent members of the local business community, were devastated by the public humiliation. Ashley eventually moved to another state to escape the constant reminders of her choices. Neither of them ever forgot the lesson they learned in the harshest possible way. That character is revealed not by what you do when people are watching, but by what you do when you believe no one will ever find out. That true worth is measured not by what you take from the world, but by what you give to others, especially when giving costs you something. And somewhere in a comfortable little house, 3 blocks from Thompson's Diner, Walt Thompson woke each morning with a sense of peace and purpose he had not felt since Dorothy passed away. He still arrived early for his shifts, still knew every regular customer by name, still found quiet ways to help those who were struggling, though now he did it as manager rather than dishwasher, with resources and support he had never imagined possible. On his desk sat a framed photograph of Dorothy, smiling at the camera during their final road trip together. Beside it was a simple handwritten note that Keanu had given him on that unforgettable day. It read simply, "The measure of a man is not found in his position or his possessions, but in the quiet kindness he shows when he thinks no one important is watching." By that measure, Walt, you are the richest man I have ever known. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.